Welcome to Tales of the LGBTQ+. My name is Douglas Parsons. It is now the winter of 2021, and the series It's a Sin has been released around the world to acclaim by both critics and viewers alike. The story follows a young group of friends who are experiencing newfound freedom as being young adults, as well as the freedom to experience and explore who they are as part of the rainbow community. GRID, HIV, AIDS are new acronyms at that time, and soon the disease plays a 24/7 role in these characters' lives. Robert Hamilton knows this story all too well, as he too was coming out and discovering himself during this same time period. Recently, Rob has published his memoir titled Our Stories, coming out in the time of HIV and AIDS. As he writes in his book, this is a story of friendship, love, loss, and drag, told with humor and compassion. Today on Tales of the LGBTQ+, I will be sitting down with Robert Hamilton to discuss his memoirs, his life, and his experience being a witness. That's today on Tales of the LGBTQ+. Welcome everyone today for another episode of Tales of the LGBTQ+. I'm Douglas Parsons, and I'm thrilled to have with us Robert Hamilton, live from Vancouver. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Being a Sunday and all.
Cold Sunday, even in Vancouver.
Yeah.
So, just right off the bat, do I call you Robert, Rob, Bobby, Bob, or the Streaker?
Yeah, exactly. Rob is good.
Rob is good, not the Streaker? We're going to come back to that story later on in this conversation. Rob has wrote a fantastic memoir. Could I call it
Yep.
a fantastic memoir called Our Stories, which details his life growing up in the 1980s into the early 1990s, especially in the time of HIV and AIDS. I was trying to think of words to describe it, and I want to say it's a great read. But at the same time, though, there's that tragedy and there's the sadness in there. So for me to say great read, that's hard. And then if I say, oh, it's a page turner, because it is, you want to know more, that's wrong too, because it's, there's the sadness involved.
Mhm.
What I came up with and what I thought might be best is I think your role as a witness to your own life and a witness to history, I think you did a damn good job making sure that we don't forget the people who were close in your life. And so, as a witness, you did very well.
Yeah, that's how I see it. That's what in going through this journey of putting the book out there. That's basically what it came down for me as well. Is that I was a witness, and I present myself as a witness to what was. I think that's a great description, actually.
80s, early 90s. Today it's February, cold day, 2021. Why now? Why was this story important to put out there to the world?
Well, I had carried it around with me for so long, and I always wanted to tell it, and I thought that it was very important to tell it. But I feel that for the longest time we weren't really ready to listen to this story, and I think that now we are more likely to start listening to the story with the success of "It's a Sin" from Britain. It seems to be that way. Uh, but yeah, it was it was something that was inside of me for so long, and I felt the need to get it out. I wanted to share the story of my friends, what they went through, and that they mattered and they counted. And didn't want them to just die off in history, as in where'd they go? I wanted to bring them back in this book, and I wanted to share the story with everyone as to what we all went through it in my family of friends and the friends around us. And so, but that is basically our story, is basically everybody else's story that went through at the same time. And I would just hope to encourage people to start sharing these stories. So when I had done a bunch of work, I just put it on the backside, and then in 2017 I got all my journals out because I journal my life. I've been journaling my life since 1987, and I went through my journals and started looking at what was there and what the story was, and I just basically decided to tell it in that format of the diary format because all of what I needed to say was there.
Hmm. You said that we maybe not have been ready for the story. Why do you think that? It's we when we look at that, we'd be like, okay, it's been 25 years since the last uh, journal entry that was in your book. So why did it take so long? Why do you think it has taken us so long to be ready to hear this story?
Because it was just so much death, and even the stories that we were telling back then was always about any story that was told was about gays dying. So people, I think, just had a whole had enough of it, and that was usually the comments that I heard, is like, oh, another death story. And so I think we put that on the back shelf for the longest time. And even so now, like with the publish of the book, I have still have people of my age. I'm 61, who say they're still not ready to hear the story and not listen to it and share it. But I'm hoping that we do, because I think it's an important story to tell, and I think it's important in our healing process as well.
Absolutely. The people that I've talked to about your book, mutual friends and or people who know about it, uh, all talk about how it's needed and what we can't forget where we came from. You mentioned 1987. You started writing a journal. Was there a reason why you started writing a journal at that time?
No, I just had it in me that I wanted to do that. I started writing back in '82, I believe it is, when I took a theater course at the Citadel. I had taken an acting class, and I was inspired to write a play, even though I didn't know how to write a play. But and it just started from there. That was my journey of beginning to become a writer, and I just became a writer. I fell in love with being a writer, and I just in '87 I had started one prior to that and never continued, and then '87 it just hit, and I decided to do it, and I just kept on going.
Fantastic. Um, we're going to make sure that we post the link to your website as well as where people can find your book. But just right now, where can people find your book at this moment?
Well, it's on Amazon, and I had several people say I don't want to buy from Amazon, but it's also available from the publisher, Renaissance Press. They're a small company out of Ottawa, and from my webs page, which is robert.hamilton60.com. And this week I just added a bunch of my one act plays I put on there. So if people want to read my one act plays, they can go there too. I have a great little horror piece. I've written two horror stories, gay horror stories. One's a lesbian horror story. That was the one I was working on all weekend. And I wrote a gay one. And so I put the gay one up on there for people to read if they want to read it. It's called a queer Canadian crime story / Saving Bobby Connor. It's a lot of fun.
Perfect. Perfect. So everyone, while you're there buying this book, make sure you check out the plays itself.
Yeah, check out the crime story. It's really a lot of fun.
Now, with this interview with you, it's it's easy for me to start at the beginning and then go from there, which we'll probably do here, and then we'll probably jump around. I noticed with this book, we get to know you as a character within this, but there's I see this as very I saw when reading this book, I saw this much more, not just you telling your story, but I saw this as a love letter of you for these men who were part of your life, who were mentors and uh, boyfriends and best friends. Would you? I see you nodding your head. Do you consider it a love story or a love letter as well?
Oh God, yeah. Ray, the characters in the story are basically Ray, Roger, and Joe and myself. And so Joe and I moved out here to Vancouver from Edmonton in '82, and then I met Ray, and we all became friends. And then we met then we met Roger. Joe met Roger, and then we became a foursome of friends. Ray and Roger weren't partners, but they shared a house out in Burnaby, and we hung out there for, it was about, must have been about 3 4 years. That there were good years, and those were the happiest years of my life. I really, really missed those years. And that's when AIDS came along and took that all away. It's like we had a happy little family, and then all of a sudden it was destroyed because of this disease. So that was, and that was exactly it. It's like I love those guys. They were very important to me in my life. And so that was part of sharing the story as well.
Looking at the writing piece, and this could be me thinking too hard or too psychological or whatever. But since publishing the book, do you find that their voices that have been running through your head all these years, that those voices have calmed down a little bit now that their stories are out, and that they're now other people can share in those stories that have been in your mind?
Yeah, they're still in my mind. Like in my wall on the back, I still see the pictures of them all the time. And in writing the book, it just made me happy to spend the time with them again. So when I was, because you're so focused on putting it all together and editing it down and so on and so on. So I spent a lot of time with them again, and that was great for me. And yeah, I guess, yeah, it's sort of like it sort of got brought some peace to me in doing so. Just it. No, I was just going to say it was it was healing for me.
Well, I was going to bring that up later, but let's bring it up now. This looks like a fantastic wall behind you. What the heck are we seeing behind you?
Yeah. So when Joe died, he what was left behind, it was all his photos, and nobody wanted them, and I took some, but I didn't take them all, and I regret that now. But the because I could have shared it with more of his friends. But anyways, the I just thought about my own photos and my own memories of these pictures that and moments that resonate with me, and I just thought that they sit in your drawer, they sit in your photo albums, and nobody actually sees them. So over the last 20 years, I've been putting this collage together, and it's basically all the people cut out of the photos, and I just put them there, and so I get to see, and I continue adding them as we go along. It's ended now because the wall is full, but you get to see myself, my friends, my family as we grow over the last 20 years. It's like Dorian Gray. We get to see ourselves age. So it's a lot of fun. I enjoy it. People come and look at it and go, "Wow."
Yeah, I just imagine just even running your hands against it and its history and the life and
Yeah, it comes alive at night when I'm sitting here looking in the dark. It's like, oh, it comes has shapes to it, and it's fun.
it's gorgeous. Well, you grew up in the Maritimes, if I believe.
Yeah, in New Brunswick.
What was it like going through that puberty and realizing that you were perhaps different from the people around you at that time?
Well, I grew up in a small town, and it was to a redneck family. We weren't an educated family. We were just working class, and at that time there was no. You didn't see gay people on TV. If you did, they were villains. You didn't see. There was just no representation whatsoever around. You heard of the fruit in town, and you heard about the lezies as they called them and stuff like that. But you never really knew that they were, that fascinated me for some reason, and because I knew that I was myself, and so yeah, you just felt alone. You felt like you're the only gay in the village.
And so you did what every young gay boy man does, and you chose to become a prison guard.
Yeah. Well, I did what every gay and lesbian person does when they graduate from grade 12. What a lot of them do, we move from our small towns and our villages, and we cross the country, and we go to the universities and colleges, and we find ourselves.
Absolutely.
So I had wanted to work with young offenders. That was in my mind, and I didn't know the access to that. So doing the jail guard thing, the correction. I went to Toronto and took a 2 year corrections program, and I wanted that to set me off into probably probation, parole, stuff like that. And so I took the 2 years course at in Toronto, and then as soon as I was finished, a couple of months later, I ended up in Edmonton because the remand center opened there, and that was where the jobs were at that time.
Yeah, the brand new remand center. So this is 1980, 81.
That would have been 1979. I moved out in September '79. Yeah, because the remand center was their big shiny object, and they went back east and they hired like basically 80% of their staff from back east, which I don't think they would do today in Alberta. And they it was a 2 year contract. They moved you out. They paid for everything. They set you up in a hotel for 2 weeks, but you had to work for them for 2 years. So it was quite a deal.
When you got to Edmonton, it seemed to me that you didn't really experience gay life while going to school in Toronto. That Edmonton was the blossoming of the gay flower that became Robert Hamilton in that way.
Yeah.
You tried getting into bars like Flashback, but they kept turning you away. And I mention this because my first experience going to the Roost was the exact same thing where they looked at me, didn't know who I was, and told me to go away. That night when you were able to go in by yourself, you saw this weird looking rough drag queen. You had other first experiences that night. And then the next day, you met for the first time fully a man by the name of Joe or Joey. What can you tell me about that first experience of Joey?
So yeah, so back then, I mean, there was no internet, so there's no way of knowing anything about gay culture. So even when I went into Toronto, it's like I had not a clue, except for that one experience of finding out where the St. Charles Tavern was. But I had nothing in me to say go back there because I had no idea how to get back downtown. I was totally green from a small town. So when I got to Edmonton, I had heard about the some of the cool guards at work talking about going to Flashback, and if you were straight and went to Flashback on the weekend, that made you cool because you partied there because it was the underground club in the city. It was the club to go to. So I tried to get it. So when I took an acting class at the Citadel, we went there and partied there one night, and then I knew where it was. So when I went back a couple of weekends after on my own, the girl that was working there was named Kathy, and she was a friend of Joe's and them. And same thing, she just wouldn't allow me in, didn't know me, thought I was straight, blah blah blah. So then I started working at the spaghetti factory, and on the weekends after the restaurant was closed, they would race over to Flashback for a drink. So I for last call, and then I got invited along. So then I became a regular face to her, and so I thought one time, a couple of months later, I thought I'm going to give it a whirl and see if I can get in by myself. So I go to Flashbacks. I go in, I strut in, trying to be cool and not frightened, even though I was. And I walk in, and there is this person dressed in what I now know as tough drag. I've never seen anything like that before. I thought this person wanted to be a girl. I thought it was bizarre. The wig, the boots, but had a mustache, had a leather vest on and high heels and so on and so on. And I thought, why, if this man wants to be a girl, then why is he not fully dressed as a girl? And so then I went home with the bartender that night, Andy, and and as it turns out, he was from not too far from where I grew up in New Brunswick. But anyway, so Andy brought me back there the next day, and then and then we're sitting there, and then these guys came and sat with us. So it was Joe and his two friends, Ross and Jerry. And so they're curious about who I am and what I do and so on. And Joe asked me what I thought of the place so far, and I said, it's okay, but I saw this person last night and I don't quite understand. And I explained to him about thinking if he wants to be a girl, then why not be a girl? And Joe says, well, I don't think it was a want to be a girl, it was a costume. And of course, I'm adamant of I know what I saw. So anyway, I finally clicks in that, oh, it was him. And Joe acknowledges that and says that was him. And so I had never heard of Tough Drag. I never heard of Gay Pride. It was their Gay Pride weekend. Was in a Tough Drag competition and he took first place. So that was the beginning of when I first met Joe, and that was the beginning of our friendship.
So I would imagine then at that time you're pretty green when it came to all matters that would be considered gay. Joe would have some more experience in that field, obvious. So you are a writer. You were doing acting classes, and of course he's acting himself, doing this tough drag. But you guys are very different in many ways. So what caused you guys to stick? What was it that gelled you guys as a twosome or a foursome later on?
I thought about that last night actually, and I thought, why? How did we become friends? Because somebody said that to me. It's like it's so odd that he was a drag queen, you're a jail guard. How come you become friends? But I mean, those are the things that we do and not who we are. And uh, and Joe was outside of drag, just a lovely man, very aware, very smart. Uh, we shared a lot he came from a small town, he came from a farm, he came from a redneck type of family, so we had some common interests in that way, and as well as like I was like ready to welcome the world, and I thought, what he was doing was like, wow, this is it, that I what Joe taught me as well as like, and what I got to see after knowing Joe was that drag wasn't about gender confusion, it was about theater. And that's how I saw it. So it was a lot of fun to me because I was interested in theater at that time. So it was just because a whole lot of thing too. What happens with in our gay culture is that there's that whole thing between masculine and feminine, and the walls that are set up in our culture about the drag queens over here, the leather guys over here, about the whole importance of this whole macho masculine thing. But I never thought in those terms. I just thought that I didn't care if Joe did drag. He was my friend, and he was a good guy. So he was just doing what he was doing. It was his theater.
So you're slowly coming out. You now really you're fully embracing that you're gay. I don't believe you're out to your parents back at home though.
No, that would be in '87. I came out to my family.
Okay.
But the thing though, I was what was happening though was that I was for the first time really alone in my life. I was in a place where there was nobody knew me, so it was safe for me to come out, and I could just live my own life and guide my own path because I was in a place where I could do that by myself.
Yeah. Speaking of safe, there's a spot in your book near the beginning where there's something very poignant and very touching when you working that night as a prison guard at the remand center, you encountered two women, two transgender women who were brought in under the accusation of soliciting. And I was really struck with the way that you behaved with them, that you treated them with kindness. And when looking at the year that was, Edmonton, the world itself would be very redneck. I would imagine that the prison guards themselves acted a certain way. You treated them with respect and love. If you were not there that night as a prison guard, would these women have received the same type of treatment?
I sort of doubt that because when you're in that uh, environment, we sort of adopt the same mentality. I never did because it comes from that comes from me growing up with the family that I did. We were working class and redneck and not very exposed to a lot of difference, but we were taught to respect other people and respect their differences. So it never dawned on me to look down on them. They weren't doing anything mean to me. It wasn't for me to judge them as I thought. That's for the system to do that. So when they came in, it was just, it was just regular people to me. And as well, the thing is that I had never met transgender people before, and I thought that was just so fascinating because I was basically about wanting to know all about the world. I wanted to know everything that was going on. So it was a curiosity to me,
Yeah.
and they were very hot looking women. I couldn't believe that there were women because as I said, it's like I never experienced that before, and I thought, really, it's like hot looking gals.
Yeah. Well, there's multiple times in your book where uh, you mention you seeing gay people for the first time in different situations and talking about how normal they looked and just how shocking that was to you at that time. So, what would be, going back to Edmonton during that time, late 1970s, early 80s, what would be a normal weekend for a gay man in this city? What would it look like?
So so the more that I came out, the more that I started. Well, once I got into flashbacks and I was able to go there, I started going every weekend, and then I started running into to Joe and his friends, and I used to hang out with, and I hung out with them, and that's how I started becoming more and more becoming friends with them. So it was basically that. It was just going to the bars, hanging out, and having fun.
Yeah. And and there was no way that you would come out at work during these years?
No, but they suspected that I was gay at work. The longer because I end up always just trying to be me, so I don't try to hide things and I don't try to put on a front. So yeah, eventually they did. It got interesting at times. Most people were okay with it. Some weren't. One of the people that I had a hard time with was a gal who I would assume was a lesbian herself, but she was very uncomfortable with that situation. She had gotten married and had a kid, but she was very butch, and so it was extremely difficult in that environment to come out. Absolutely, yeah. And then you hear about how they talk about the prisoners who are gay or who are transgender or whatever, and it wasn't kind, believe me.
So before we move on to your move out to Vancouver, do you have can you read to us maybe something from the Edmonton time that's within your book?
Yeah, actually, I picked out a piece. I picked out the part about meeting Joe for the first time.
Oh, perfect. Perfect.
So I read that. It's maybe about 3 4 minutes, I think.
Sure.
Okay, so this is from the spring of 1981. I enrolled in acting classes again at the Citadel Theatre. This time I was inspired to write my own play, even though I knew nothing about writing a play. But I was young, cocky, and happily ignorant. I volunteered to work midnights at the remand center. Arriving on shift, the prisoners were already locked down, and my job for the following 8 hours would consist of sitting in my office that looked out into the tier, and once an hour go from cell to cell, shining my flashlight inside, making sure all prisoners were accounted for and breathing. This took all of 5 minutes. Between rounds, I sat at the office and banged out my play on an electric typewriter. When my second round of acting classes came to an end, it was decided we'd celebrate that Saturday night at a private gay dance club called Flashback. It was the underground dance club in the city. I had heard the straight cool guards at work talking about partying there. If you were straight and partied at Flashback on the weekend, that meant you were cool. Our acting teacher was a member and able to sign us all in. The club was packed with people and energy. There were drag queens, girls with girls, boys with boys, and men in leather. It was a lot for my virgin eyes to take in. A guy asked me to dance, but I politely declined. Why would I? I wasn't gay. The only one I danced with that night was Tanya, one of the girls I befriended in acting class and would remain a long-term friend with. While on the dance floor, I was shocked to see two male guards from the remand center dancing together. I had no idea they were gay. They worked a different shift, so I didn't know them personally. Now knowing where Flashback was located, I returned on my own a few Saturday nights later. I first sat inside my car working up the courage to go inside. When I made my move, I made a mad dash into the club. Inside the main door was a cashier's booth where I needed to show my membership card and pay an entrance fee before being buzzed through another door and into the club. Since was neither a member nor a familiar face, the girl sitting inside the booth denied my entrance. But I persisted, and each time I showed up, the girl inside the booth turned me away. Summer 1981. I began working part-time as a waiter at the Old Spaghetti Factory restaurant in downtown Edmonton. A few of the waiters on staff were gay. Eventually, I would come to understand being gay and being a waiter was considered cliché. Everybody loved the gays at the Old Spaghetti Factory, and on Friday and Saturday nights, after the restaurant closed, the remaining staff would race the few blocks over to Flashback for last call. Once the staff got to know me, I was invited along, and soon I became a familiar face to the girls sitting inside the booth. One Saturday night in August, when I wasn't working at the jail or the restaurant, I showed up at Flashback on my own and was allowed in. Both excited and nervous, I strutted into the bar. Standing just inside the door in front of me was a he-she, literally half man, half woman. There was no one dominant gender. A motorcycle cap rested on top of her mound of big hair. He-she wore lipstick and makeup at the same time. He-she had a full-grown mustache. There was hair on her chest, but no breasts. She wore a leather vest, a corset, a long black leather high-heeled boots that stopped at the upper thigh. She had a drink in one hand and a bullwhip in the other, and she periodically snapped. She was on, and those around him, her, laughing at her cutting and sharp wit. She was loud, animated, and commanded attention as she passed through the crowd. No doubt it was a wow moment for me. I was fascinated, captivated, and confused. But that didn't stop me from taking the bartender home that night. We were the same age and both from northern New Brunswick. That night I had sex for the first time. I felt awkward, somewhat embarrassed, and conscious of the act, but it felt right. The following afternoon, the bartender took me back to Flashback to show me off to his friends. I was fresh meat, a new face, and a curiosity. We sat at a table and were soon joined by four of the regulars. They were impressed with me being a jail guard. It meant I was butch. I was asked what I thought of the scene so far and said I hadn't much experience, but so far so good. Then I went on to tell them about the he-she I'd seen the night before. I told them I was okay with the he-she wanting to be a girl, but found it odd he was not fully dressed as one. The guy sitting across from me said that perhaps the he-she didn't want to be a girl and maybe what the he-she was wearing was a costume. I was sure of what I had seen and empathetically argued that he wanted to be a girl. The guy emphatically disagreed and insisted it was a costume. About to continue arguing my point, I had a light bulb moment. Click. The guy sitting across from me was the he-she that I was telling him about. He smiled and nodded his head, confirming that he was indeed the he-she. It was Edmonton's Gay Pride, and he was in costume in a tough drag competition where he took first place. I congratulated him and confessed I had never heard of tough drag or Gay Pride before. His name was Joe Butler, and unbeknown to both of us, that was the beginning of what would be a long-lasting friendship. For Joe and his drag queen friends sitting at the table that afternoon, Flashback was their playground where they got to be young, gay, and creative. Through Joe, I soon learned drag wasn't a gender confusion issue, but pure theater.
Thank you. There's a lot of characters within your book, and I hate saying the characters because they're real life people. But if I remember right, and it struck me as you're reading, Joe Butler, I think he's the only one that you actually give a last name for within the book itself. I think everybody else has first names to it. And I'm just wondering if that was a conscious choice on your part of making sure that Joe stood out above maybe others. I don't know how to ask that question, but it just strikes me that Joe Butler was being the only last name I actually read in it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think I haven't thought of that, but I think you're right. I don't think there was any reason behind it, but
I'm sure some psychologists will write in on this and tell us exactly what that means. So Joe and you decide to make the move to Vancouver, and it's minus 25 degrees out today with snow. We just got out of minus 40. I understand the need to move to the West Coast to somewhere warm, but as you and Joe move to the West Coast, what's taking place in your life and his life at this time, as well as the greater gay world? And let's get into HIV and AIDS maybe during this part here as well.
so what happened was that in March of '82. So I met Joe in '81. So in March, a couple of months, about 6 months later after knowing Joe, he was part of the court system. So he was Joe, just as I met Joe in that August, I believe it was, is when he stepped down from being emperor. And so he was part of the court system, which I had no idea about. And so him and Sam were going to the coronation ball for Olive's step down that March. So he invited me to come along. He said it's a big gay party and I would have fun. I didn't have a clue what that was about or what I was getting into, but sure enough, I was on for an adventure. So I went out with Joe and Sam to the coronation ball, which was held at the Commodore Ballroom with hundreds of gay men and some women, and it was an eye opener. It was quite fabulous. It was like I had never seen anything like that before, and so what was interesting though is that it was like many times fold the amount of gay people in Vancouver than what I had experienced in Edmonton. I didn't even know what existed past Edmonton, to be honest. I had no idea about Vancouver. So when I got there and saw Vancouver, I thought, really? March, no snow, flowers are growing. It's like, and this place exists in Canada. So anyway, so then I don't think I would have took the initiative on my own to move, but it was Joe that when we got back after the coronation, Joe was going, well, why don't we move back? If we're going to be gay, we may as well just go to Vancouver, where it's a bigger population, have more fun. So, and it was cheaper to do as two than one. So he says, why don't you come? So my 2-year contract with the Remand Center was done at that point, and I said, sure. So we took a trip out here, drove around to see where we'd want to live, sort of thing for a week. We hung out and then went back to Edmonton, quit our jobs, and moved out here.
Perfect. So during this time, you see in the media the gay disease, uh, the gay cancer, and you start hearing about this thing that's starting to strike our community. And at that time, it was the gay community. Were there worries in your group's minds about this, or was it something that just other people had to worry about?
It took a while for us to acknowledge that it existed. The thing is, so we moved. So the coronation ball was in March, April, May, June. 3 months later, Joe and I were living in Vancouver. I had joined the baseball team here, and I had broke my leg, and so I was off of work for a while. But then when that was healed, I got hired on at a few of the halfway houses as an auxiliary CO. And so when you're working in the jails, there is a lot of time downtime because basically you're a babysitter. And so you spend a lot of time by yourself. So especially in the halfway houses because they mostly go out into the community during the day. And so the newspaper's always lying around. And that's when I started picking up the newspaper and started reading more about what was going on in the world and the city around me. So in that, I started reading, I think it was in late 82 or early 83 that I started reading about this disease that is, um, I started reading about these gay men that were showing up at the hospitals in Los Angeles and San Francisco and New York and with the pneumonia and Carposi. And so I started following this story as it carried on. So and that was buried in within the paper at that time. Eventually, it moved to the front pages, but that took a while for that to happen. So was very much aware of it at the very beginning. But I remember in '84 being at Joe's place because we had lived together, and then I met Ray and lived with Ray, and then Joe got his own place, and so on. So I was at Joe's place, and his friends were visiting from Edmonton, and I was telling them about what I was reading in the newspaper. And so that was '84, and they dismissed me as being a worrywart, and that was just media hype, and it wasn't going to affect us, and so on and so on. And then history knows what happened there.
Yeah, well, and it's really important to note right now that sex education, when it came to condoms and things like that, when it comes to safety, uh, that wasn't part of conversation. It wasn't part of the education, and it was condoms weren't a part of it. And we're going to have an episode of this later on this Tales of the LGBTQ plus, but the role of bathhouses in the gay man's community as a way to meet people, as a way to express yourself. So, so it, the conditions were there in place in the 1980s for this to spread itself. Spring 1987, you and Joe go in to get your results, and I'm shocked. It took 3 weeks to get results. I know what it was like to have 1 week of mental anguish waiting for the results. I don't know what I could have done with 3 weeks. But Joe and you both go in. You learn that you're negative. Joe learns that he is positive. How did this had to have been a key turning point in your life?
So I'll just back up a little bit from that. So the bathhouses. The bathhouses were hugely popular at that time, prior to, I would say, 87, when we started finding out. So like on a Saturday night after the bar closed, I mean, there would be a lineup out the door and down the street to get into the bathhouse. They were hugely popular. So, but this was a time when nobody knew about that they were getting positive. So the whole thing is that, so AIDS started in 19, basically we'll say 1980. It took till 1986, 87 for people to start getting tested before a blood test became available for people to find out if they were infected at that time. So between 82, basically when it started really becoming into our community, between 82 and 86, that was 4 years of people getting infected and not knowing it. Fortunately for myself, I had met Ray and I was in a monogamous relationship, so I lucked out there. So then in 86, 87, when the blood test became available, Joe and I decided to go and get this to test. And I still remember that day. It was at the VGH. There was a sex clinic there. You went in and then you come back. You did the blood test and then you had to wait the 3 weeks. That was a long 3 weeks for us to wait. And then we went back to get our results, and Joe was positive and I was negative. And he said that, he said it felt like being hit over the head with a sledgehammer when he was told that. He said he wanted to run out of the office, but his legs wouldn't move.
So at that time, there's no pills, there's no magic cocktail, nothing like that. And it seemed that if you went to the doctors and they said, okay, now it's time for AZT or AZT, depending where you're listening right now, that seemed like that was the worst thing ever. Here's a pill that can help you, but it seemed like if you were at the point where they could put you on the AZT, that you're close to death.
Well, the thing about, well, because AZT was the only thing that was available. So because the cocktail didn't come out till 96. So people stopped dying in 97, basically, after they got the cocktail. So from 1980, that was 16 years that people were getting positive and dealing with disease and dying, and there was no help whatsoever. So when AZT came out, it was like, oh, thank God, because every year when it first started, it was like, next year we'll have a vaccine. Next year we'll have a vaccine. Next year there'll be something next year. Next year never came. In 5 years, 5 years never came. So that was horrifying. Yeah, it took a long time for us to get some help with the cocktail, which was 96. And in the process, you got sick, and even prior to the blood test, you never knew you were sick until you had HIV or AIDS until you got sick, and then you knew. So when I remember when Roger got sick, was really sick, and AZT was available, and it took 8 weeks for the prescription to come in. So he was sick as hell, laying on the couch. I went on my weekends to take care of him, on my days off to take care of him, and he was on this deathbed, basically, by the looks of him, and he had to wait the 8 weeks for his pills to come in. And then when the pills came in, because I had to advocate for him on this, the pills came in, and then he had to wait to make an appointment to see the pharmacist at St. Paul's Hospital who was the only person giving out the medication, the AZT, in the city at that time. And so when I phoned her, it was like he had to wait. It was going to be like several weeks to a month or two that he would have to wait to see her to get the pills after he's waited the 2 months already, after he waited the 8 weeks already. So because of my advocacy for him, he got in. After that phone call, he was there the next week because I was going to call the news. I threatened her in that way of calling news, the TV, the radio, all that stuff. But what she did after that conversation was put me off to the social worker at St. Paul's. And through the social work at St. Paul's, I found out about AIDS Vancouver, which I did not know even existed. And so through AIDS Vancouver, I was hooked up with this guy in the West End, so in the community, where he was collecting all the AZT pills from those whose body was rejecting them and pooling them and setting people up who were waiting the 8 weeks for their pills to come in so they could start until their pills got in. So that night after talking to the pharmacist, I met with this guy in his apartment, and he gave me pills enough to start Roger on the regime until he got his pills. So it was fabulous to see that type of community activism going on at that time.
Absolutely. So here you are with your best friends, and now all of a sudden, you're not just best friend, but now you're going into the role of nurse, caregiver, all of those things. And what you were just mentioning with Roger was written about in the book in such an amazing way with you using a stern voice, and the fact that though that medication was at the pharmacy, at it was there, they just couldn't sign it out to you because the doctor was away, and there was all these hoops you had to jump through, that even though his pills were there, you were still having to wait.
Yeah, because there were so many people in line to get the AZT. There were so many people that she had to see all of those people first before she can get to Roger, which was going to take a month or two. So that's how many people were in line to get those pills. We wanted something, we needed something to save us, and that was what was available at that time, and it did a lot more harm by the sounds of it than it did well.
So at this time, you're more out and about in Vancouver, you've met more people. Is it safe to say that all of a sudden HIV AIDS was no longer an American story that was in New York, San Francisco, LA? It hit Vancouver hard, didn't it?
It did, absolutely, it hit hard.
Yeah. A friend of mine who is going to be appearing in one of these upcoming episodes talks about how in 1989, it was his first year. It was his worst year experiencing everything because that year he went to approximately over 65, 70 funerals that year alone. Was that your experience as well?
I didn't go to that many by no means. I didn't know a lot of people in the community. Joe was more in the community than I was. Uh, uh, but you just the thing is when people started showing up in the bars. So you heard about HIV, you heard about AIDS. It hadn't really hit us yet. We weren't that aware, but I was reading about it, and then it comes to us. You can't ignore it when the people started showing up in the bars. So these people that you go into a bar, you go hi, the people that you sort of know but don't know, and friends of friends, and then you go in and then you start seeing them looking like they have it. And I remember two of Joe's friends who were from Saskatoon, and his name was Brian, and Brian looking, and I always said hi to Brian and stuff like that, and I couldn't approach him because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know, do you talk about it? Do you not talk about it? Do you say you're sorry? So it just became easier not to say anything. So it took a while for us to grow accustomed to being part of that as well.
Yeah, because at that time, especially too, with the sarcoma visible, being able to see it's right there in your face and everything. You mentioned how you were part of that long-term monogamous relationship at that time. In the book too, you talk about how relationships change and you move on and things like that. When it gets to during that time with intimacy, especially with a newcomer, or like with somebody who was new, how it had to have been difficult with just getting to that intimacy, to that sexual part of what if, is this my time, is it not? And so I'm struck by this because you're maybe afraid of other people, and then I look at what's happening now with COVID and how we're kind of afraid of each other. So did the HIV/AIDS crisis that you experienced in the 80s and 90s, did it give you any particular insight into handling things when COVID started happening?
Well, when COVID happened, it was total PTSD for I think for a lot of gay men. It was like because I work right now in a community center that brings services to the homeless and addicts and people with mental health, and which is a very vulnerable population for COVID as well. And so yeah, so when COVID started, it was like it was total PTSD. It was about this disease that you can catch so easily, and you don't and eat more easily because you don't have to have sex with them. You can just catch them from talking to them. And so it was about wearing the mask and taking precautions, and it was very difficult because I needed to wear that mask. I wanted to have protection, and it wasn't the feeling of what was happening around me. So I was fighting a bit with my employers and the people around me to wear the mask, and I was horrified that they just didn't take it serious. And it just pushed me back to I remember that conversation with Joe at his apartment when telling them about HIV and saying I was a worrywart. It was exactly that moment. It was like trying to tell people it's like, no, you have to understand. And yeah, it was interesting to go through that. Also, as well as I remember in the March, weeks before COVID started, before we got the lockdown, I had went to the bar because I was hearing that the young guys were basically sex was happening in the bars again, and they were very open again like they were prior to when HIV started. And I thought, I wanted to check it out and go see. So I went to one of the parties, and I thought, oh, okay, so sexual freedom is back like the 70s prior to HIV. And I thought, I wonder how long this is going to. I wonder how long our sexual freedom period is going to last this time, because the last one only lasted 10 years. 2 weeks later, we're in lockdown. So we're back to the whole point of not being able to go to a bathhouse, not being able to hook up again. Yeah,
Right back into it.
didn't last long.
No. Well, and in your book, and we're going to come back to Joe because we have to talk about Joe Butler. But you talk about how when the cocktail comes about, then all of a sudden, about 3, 4 years later, people start going, "Hey, let's do barebacking," those type of things, and that worry of going, "Hey, what did we learn from this?" Now today we have something that's called PrEP, and PrEP cuts the mission of HIV, but doesn't stop STDs, things like that. What do you think today that we do better? Sorry, let me say that again. What do we do today that is better than what we did before? Like, what have we learned from the HIV/AIDS crisis? Or did we learn anything at all?
Did we learn anything? I don't think we learn anything. I don't. Same as COVID. People go, "Oh, the world's going to change." When the COVID is over, people are going to be back in the bars, back in the bathhouses, back in as life has happened as we carried on before. Because I think we're just that way as people. Uh, we just go back to old behaviors, and we want to have our fun, and we want to live life joyously, and without restrictions. and so I do. I think that COVID's good. PrEP is here, and everybody wants a fuck bareback, and I understand that. If I was taking PrEP, I would do bareback as well. And the a sexual disease like gonorrhea and chlamydia or whatever, hey, you can take a pill and you can get rid of it. You're not going to die. I can accept that. So yeah, thank God for PrEP. But the unfortunate thing about PrEP to me is that it sort of puts a kibosh on finding a cure. I think it makes it's instead of let's get rid of the PrEP and let's actually find a vaccination so that we can just wipe this thing out altogether. Uh, but fortunately, we do have PrEP, and it is hopefully we can eliminate it that way. But I think COVID's the same thing. I think we'll just go back to the same behavior.
That makes sense. And hopefully politicians, will understand with PrEP and with the cure for HIV that that's necessary, that we still have to continue with that. And kind of going back to what we were talking about before, the politicians at this time with HIV and AIDS, there was no support.
No, no, because it was a conservative government. I mean, conservatives are never are hardly ever friends of the gays. Even if in today's culture, when conservatives get in, they're always still trying to take something away from us, whether it's transgender rights or whatever. But they're always trying to take something from us. So, and at that time when AIDS started, you have to think it was Reagan in the States. You had Thatcher in Britain. You had Mulroney here in Canada, and in British Columbia for us, we had Van der Zalm, who was definitely not a friend of the gays. And when AZT come out, he was determined that we weren't going to. We had to pay for the medication, and that was a fight that we had to do in BC against his government. So yeah, it was rough for us because, and I think that's why it took 6-7 years to get a blood test, and then another 16 years to get the cocktail.
Yeah. And you mentioned 6-7 years when it comes with the politics of that and the cocktail. It also took 6-7 years for Joe living with HIV. And in many ways, that's a long time living with it during that time. To me, it seems like he was the exception rather than what was normal. So when you were with Joe and being his nurse, being his guide, his witness, did you feel that you had to do everything for him? Or was it where you had to step back and you were just going, this is hopeless. There's nothing I can do.
Well, there was real nothing that we could do because the only way that he was going to be cured was by having would have been having the cocktail, which he didn't survive long enough to benefit from. But we're close friends and we took care of each other, and I'm very dedicated to my friends. When I don't have a lot of friends, but the ones that I have, I cherish. And we're like especially in gay culture, you become we become family. Our gay friends are our family because so many of our families, especially back in the 80s and prior to that, disowned their kids or didn't want to talk about it, or it wasn't like it was today. So when Joe got sick, when Roger got sick, you just stepped in. You step in, you did what you had to do. And it was, we just understood this was our fate, but we always held on for hope that that something will come along to save us from all of this. And and some people survived it and were able to benefit from the cocktail, and lots of people did not.
And as we're talking about this, as we're talking about your book called Our Stories, we're talking about the sadness of all, but I also want to say that there's a lot of moments where there's a lot of laughter and like a laugh out loud moments where you're reading this and you know what's coming, but then there's these moments where you just have to laugh out loud of the crazy and zany things that are happening, during this time, and especially when you have a friend like Joe and other people that were part of your life. So I want to make sure that it's not all that way, when it's not all doom and gloom. That's for sure. When something that you wrote in the book, it was around the 1991 time, and I don't have the quote in front of me right now, but Joe said to you something about that the kind of person that he is reflected in having you as his best friend.
Yeah, he said that. Yeah, yeah.
What did he mean by that?
Yeah, I don't know. It's that was about him being such a character with his drag and so on and so on. Even though he did drag, he was very much a conservative guy in a lot of respect. I mean, but that comes from how we're raised. But yeah, he said it was indicative of who I was because I was his friend, and I don't know what he really meant by that. But yeah,
I think it's more of a positive than anything, that's for sure.
we were good friends. I mean, we had our we were different characters, but we were good friends.
In 1993, you are away in Toronto, I believe, for a while, and you're working on a screenplay. And, and then you're coming back to Vancouver, back to Toronto, those type of things. And you don't mention it in the book, but as a writer, I want to know this thing. Your short film that you created, you said, it's okay. But you never told the readers what your short film was about. Do you remember what it was about?
I made two short films when I went to the Canadian Film Center as a writer. And so I made two short films. The first short film was a John Waters type film called Men Are Pigs, and it's uh, how much Joe influenced me. It was they were men in drag and a mother and an aunt and a daughter, and it was a lot of fun. It was the pastel colors and so on. And then I did my major film was about a guy who is married and has a kid, and yeah, he goes away on weekends because he's a businessman and gets in drag and has sex with men.
Yeah. So drawing upon real life then.
Yeah. Wasn't a very the Men Are Pigs one was a much better film than the other one. The other one didn't work out as well, but it was what it was. So it was Joe's influence of him exposing me to and that's one of the benefits from meeting Joe and knowing Joe is like I didn't come out into a macho, uh, overtly masculine environment. I was in more part of the gay culture as a whole. So I got to be very comfortable with it. I knew all the drag queens and I went to see his shows and I supported Joe, but yet, I would go to more like the leather bar and play baseball and stuff like that. So it was awesome that I got that from Joe, that I got to feel comfortable with the gender differences in our culture. So seeing, like transgender issues now was not, you know, being transgender back then was certainly not what it is now. But I was comfortable with that back then because I met transgender people through Joe. As a matter of fact, I remember going to see a play here. Um, I forget the Edmonton playwright's name, but it was at the Playhouse, and we went to see it because it was a transgender actress that Joe knew from Edmonton,
Oh,
and we went. So I was very comfortable with all of that way back when.
I'll have to search and find that out.
It was called B Movie the Play. It was, I think, Dennis Foon or whatever his name is. It was awesome.
Perfect. We'll look that up for sure. Uh, Joe said from your book, and in the book, I want people to read because this is a love story for Joe, and there's Joe's point of view, and you need to know who he is. And today we're focusing a lot on the author, the man that we're talking to. Um, Joe said, if it wasn't for the stigma of having AIDS, dying would be a whole lot easier.
Yeah,
Such true words, and it hits it to a T.
yeah.
Do you think that this stigma of HIV and AIDS is still prevalent in our community?
I do.
Do you think it's still the same? Yeah.
I do. I think that people still need to that people feel the need to explain themselves, to tell people that they're HIV positive. When you're on the websites like Growler or Scruff or whatever, you get to see people announce that they are. It breaks my heart when I do look at that and see that somebody's 20 in their 20s or 30s are HIV positive. It still breaks my heart. But yeah, I don't think we got over that. But I think that with PrEP, I think makes it a whole lot easier for those who are HIV infected. I think the stigma has gone away a lot, thank God, with our own community. But I still think it's a part of it for a lot of people. I think you still have to have that conversation with people if you are HIV positive. I'm not saying that you have to have. I'm thinking that they feel the need to have to disclose that. So it's still an issue for some people, but thankfully not as huge as it was back then.
Well, and going with that, with what you were saying, and with some of our listeners who may not have experienced this, you stated in your book that it seems if you're gay and you make it past the age of 40, then you're one of the lucky ones.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of people my age feel that too. I think that we feel like we're survivors. We're not only witnesses, but we're survivors.
And as I mentioned to you before, maybe before at the beginning of this podcast, I graduated in 1993. So I turned 18 in 1993. And I had a conversation with my mom about a year ago saying that if I was born 3 years earlier, 6 years early, 6 years earlier, I probably would not be here right now based on knowledge and those facts. And that's damn scary because I'm only 45 today. And just to think what one would have missed. I hate to ask you this question. It's so hard. Why were you one of the lucky ones? Why are you a witness and not a statistic?
I think because of the job that I was doing of at the as being a jail guard and reading the newspapers, I was informed of this crisis at the very beginning. And as well, I think that helped me a lot was, and also I think what saved me was that I was in that relationship for 2.5 years with Ray when this disease first started. So I think those two things really saved me. And then, then I just became a worrywart, and I was panicked about the whole thing. And oh yeah, I didn't have sex for like months on end, maybe 3 times a year during that time.
Safety, yeah. Now, this is a side and nothing with it, but Ray was a part of the book here as well, not just partner, but continue on. It seemed like every year or so that whenever you mentioned Ray, he always had a new partner, a new boyfriend.
Oh yeah, Ray did. Yeah, yeah.
So
Ray's one of those people that does not like to be without a relationship.
yeah, it seems that way. It seemed that way.
Yeah, he had one going out the back door. He had one coming in the front door. He died. Ray passed away. Ray passed away. I believe 2 years ago. Died of lung cancer.
There's so much to ask there, but I don't want to go there too much because it's brings back the memories there. May 31st, 1994, Joe dies. And when earlier on I was talking about how the book is beautifully written or an excellent read. This is the part in the book, by that time I'm in tears, of course, even though you inevitably know what's going to happen. But Rob, the way that you wrote his final days, just, it was so clear. And by that point, Joe Butler is now a person who as a reader, and how you wrote his final days so poignant and so clear. I don't even know if I have a question when it comes to that. Tell you the truth, it was so well written that people need to read the book, to the memoir, to be able to experience that. But I will ask, Joe dies at this point. What, where did you go after this? What your role was as a nurse, your role was an advocate. After Joe died, did life settle down for you, or was it just confusing afterwards?
Well, I went through, and when I look back at it, uh, well, I was in film school. So I went to film school in Toronto, and then I came back that summer, summer prior to when he died, to take care of him because we thought he was going to die at that time, and basically nursed him back to health. And he just needed a friend, and he needed someone to give him a hug, basically. So we went through that summer, and then I came back the following spring, and then he dies. But I was still living in Toronto, so when he died, I had to go back to Toronto and go back to work, basically make some money and start paying my bills. And then I hung out in Toronto for a little bit, and then I went to New Brunswick because I was either going because the Harris government got in and the halfway house I was working at had closed down. So I decided to go home and hang out with my family for a year before coming back to Vancouver. And I went back and I just dealt with the fallout of all of that, of Roger's death and Joe's death. And because now I was at a distance from the whole thing, I was back into a small little town, just sitting there, hanging out and writing and hanging with my family. And let all that just settle in, I guess.
Yeah, dealing with that. And at this point, you're out to your family as well. I think it was 1990 or so. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yeah. Yeah, and then it's like you did, and it's I went back there but didn't escape the whole AIDS thing because there's a story I tell in the book about going to the dances I call again, there's no internet and there's nothing, no phone to get on and figure out where things happen. So you go into the phone book and you look up the gay and lesbian uh, alliance in the phone book, and I phone the phone number, and the person there calls me back and tells me that there's social dances that are happening uh, in the pubs. If they rent a sports hall or a bar once a month, and I went to these things, and I had another experience there where that was involved with a guy that was HIV positive, ended up taking his own life. And that was very sad. That made me really sad. I just thought, here I am in small town New Brunswick, and you can't escape it.
Yeah. And I wasn't going to bring that part up because just because it affected me in a way too. And I didn't know with your memoir, it's matter of fact. It's here's what happens, here's what it is. We see a little bit of your emotion every once in a while, but not a lot because you're a witness during this case. But it seemed that this experience that you had at that dance, especially with that young man, that there was some regret. That was the only time I ever experienced within your writing that you felt regret. There's no regret being friends with Joe. There's no regrets taking care of him, loving him, Roger, those. But it seemed like that moment, that was a regretful moment for yourself.
I wonder if that's because with Roger and Joe, I did as much as I could to help them and was there for them. So there was no regrets really to be had. We just had to deal with what is and let it be. Whereas with this guy, I was exposed to him, and I was just you just found out his story, and it was just a sad story to me. And I just thought that there was no helping anybody around. I didn't know what his situation was, and he broke my heart. I just felt for him so bad, because also as well, just seeing him at that dance before he goes and before he takes his own life. He went to the beach that night and then drowned himself, and I just thought it was just so sad. It just broke my heart for him. I still think of him, and I just find that one of the saddest moments through that whole crisis. It was one of the saddest moments that I came across.
Yeah, it came across in the book, for sure. We are coming close to the end of time. We've probably taken up more than your time than expected. Can we have another reading from your book at all?
Yeah, sure. I have a piece that it's like the piece I'm going to read is from when I come back. It's June 20th, 1993. From when I'm in film school and I come back that summer to take care of Joe because we think that he's going to, because we think he's not going to make it past that summer, but he does, and then he dies the following spring. But I'm going to read from that. I'm a little dry here today. June 20, 1993. Ray picked me up at the airport when I arrived last night. By the time we got to his place, it was time for him to go to bed. He's been running his own company for the past few years, Can-Am Air Conditioning, so he has an early start in the morning. Ray gave me a heads up about how shocked I will be when I see Joe. I woke up early this morning, had a cup of tea, and eventually got ready to walk over to Joe's place. I called first to let him know I was on my way. I had put all negative thoughts about seeing Joe out of my mind. However, on arrival, I approached his apartment with much trepidation. I had not given any thought to how uncomfortable this might be for Joe or me, or how difficult it might be for him to open his door and allow me in. I thought I would just be happy to see him and he would be just as happy to see me. I buzzed Joe's suite. It took a bit of time for him to answer. I said, "Hi, it's me." In a weak voice, he said, "Come on up," and buzzed me in. Stepping out of the elevator, knocking on his door, and waiting for Joe to answer was distressing. Mickey and Ray were right. Joe's appearance was shocking. He was a rack of bones wrapped in his burgundy terry cloth housecoat. Joe said, "Scary, eh?" I said, "No, but thin and sickly looking, yes." We moved on to his balcony with its $1,000,000 view. It was nice, and it was a nice enough day. Joe sat with his face to the wind. He said the wind helps him breathe more easily. He said he hadn't heard from two close friends in the past few months, and he was very, very hurt by it. This week he was questioning his worth as a person while on this earth. We talked about it and ended up laughing. He joked at least he could proudly say, as a man, he got to wear some really pretty dresses. In the end, we agreed that he should be proud. I teared up when he was telling me about the visit with his mum. He smoked pot in front of her. He said at first it felt odd smoking in front of her, but she understood it helped with his pain and his appetite. He asked her to smoke pot with him, but she wouldn't. He told his mother what she can do for him is to not let the family refer to him as that fruit that died from that gay disease. He wants her to tell them that he is her gay son who died of AIDS, and it's not a gay disease. He suggested his mother confide in those close to her so she has support when he passes. She said she had already done that. Joe doesn't want to go home now for a visit because he's looking too thin and sickly. He would rather they remember him the way he was. The only medication he's taking is one pill for the herpes sores that line the inside of his stomach and morphine for the pain. He says he knows exactly when his 4 hours are up and it's time to pop another morphine pill. While sitting on the balcony and smoking pot, we watched two middle-aged Asian ladies going in and coming out of the apartment across from us. They were moving out or helping someone else move. With each trip out of the building, the two carried armfuls of stuff that they shoved into their parked car. In no time, Joe and I had them pegged as the Asian Thelma and Louise, and what they were packing into the car was everything they were taking with them on their camping trip. We debated which one was Thelma and which one was Louise, but it became obvious when the one lady came out of the building carrying a microwave. She was obviously Thelma, the ditzy one. Who else would take a microwave on a camping trip? The other lady, Louise, came out carrying a child's tricycle. Joe and I decided that was obviously for their quick getaway. Before leaving, Joe wanted me to walk with him the few blocks over to Main Street so he can go to the bank. He was slow-moving and unsteady on his feet. He did his best to hide his frailty. While at the bank, I watched him snap at someone for staring at him. He hated being stared at. After the bank, we started walking back towards his apartment. We moved slowly but steady, and halfway there, Joe became irritated with himself. He had wanted to stop in at the 7-Eleven to buy a popsicle. The morphine gives him serious dry mouth, and popsicle provides relief. Joe waited on the sidewalk while I hurried back to the 7-Eleven. When I returned, I handed the popsicle over to Joe and immediately knew it was a dumb move on my part. I should have first broken the popsicle in two. Now that Joe had the popsicle, there was no way in hell he was giving it back to me. It was his opportunity to prove that he was stronger than he appeared and quite capable of breaking the damn popsicle in half. I had no choice but to stand back and watch. Joe put all his strength into breaking that fucking popsicle in two but couldn't. The popsicle ended up breaking into several pieces and fell onto the ground except for one small piece that remained on the one stick. Joe stood so vulnerable before me, and in that moment I sensed he absolutely hated me. While watching Joe wrestle with the frozen popsicle was a flashback moment for me. I was there before with Roger, but instead of a popsicle, it was a child's party balloon. Joe was sick, and I was at his Roger was sick, and I was at his place decorating the house and blowing up balloons for his 40th birthday. Roger sat at the kitchen table watching and decided he would help by blowing up a few balloons. I can still see Roger sitting at the end of the kitchen table, trying with all his might to blow up the balloon. He didn't have the lung power. Man versus kid's party balloon, and kid's party balloon won. It confirmed to Roger how sick he was. He started crying and he became really angry. Here I am, a grown man, and I can't even blow up a fucking kid's balloon. It was a sad and haunting memory, similar to watching Joe wrestle with the frozen popsicle. Joe and I slowly made our way back to his apartment in silence. I figured he had enough for one day. When I was leaving, he demanded his house keys back and made it quite clear to me. And don't you think you're moving in here, Mrs. Hamilton, and taking over, because you're not. I showed him where I had placed his house keys on the counter and gave him a big hug and told him I'd be back tomorrow. I sense he hated me even more in that moment and just wanted me to tell me to stay the fuck away. Unlike with Roger, I wasn't going to keep let Joe keep me at a distance, not without a fight.
As I mentioned before, as a witness to Joe and his life, you did well. You did extremely well, and it's a book that is very poignant. It's a story that needs to be told and has been told, and I believe that many others should share their stories when they feel comfortable to do so as well. So, as a final question for you here today, Rob, the Rob from today, you've gained knowledge, you've gained more experience. You're working today with people who are homeless and poverty, with addiction. So you've gained a lot of insight. What would you tell the young Rob uh, who had just moved to Edmonton back in 1979, who had found his first Blue Boy magazine, going around being known as the Streaker from CN Tower? What would you tell that young man if you were able to have a conversation with him today?
I would tell him that it all works out. Not to change a
Mm.
thing, just to keep on going, keep your head up, and just continue through life. It'll throw you a lot of curveballs, but believe in yourself, trust in your friends, and trust in the gay community and love the gay community. It's a place to call home. It's a safe place to call home. It's good.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and it was a pleasure reading your book, a pleasure being able to talk to you today. I have a million more questions, but that will be for another podcast for sure.
Thank you, Douglas.
Yeah. So, on behalf of Rob, um, thank you for listening to this episode of Tales of the LGBTQ plus. My name is Douglas Parsons. Until next time, keep safe and always remember to text when you get home. Until next time.